You want to eat a whole rainbow of vegetables and fruits. When I make a big salad, I try to get something from every part of the rainbow, something red, something orange, something yellow, something green, and something purple blue. I aim for at least 3 green, 2 orange yellow, 2 pink red, 1 purple blue, 1 white beige every day. This evening, my presentation is called Constructing an Optimal Plant-Based Diet for Preventing and Fighting Disease. And I would like to begin just with a brief outline. We're going to talk just a little bit about the strength of the link between diet and disease. We'll talk about why plant-based diets are so effective. The bulk of the presentation will be sort of the practical piece, 7 steps to an optimal plant-based diet for preventing and fighting disease. This is what we know. We know that 70% of deaths globally are due to chronic diseases of our own making. We know that 90% of type 2 diabetes, 80% of heart disease, and about 30 to 70% of cancers are considered entirely preventable. And in 2011, the World Health Organization identified the 4 big lifestyle culprits, and they identified them as being smoking, drinking alcohol, physical inactivity, and an unhealthy diet. And they actually defined an unhealthy diet as one that is based on processed foods with added fat, sugar, and salt, and animal products rich in saturated fats. It's low in high fiber plant foods, such as vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, and nuts. At the lowest risk are populations who live simply, are physically active, and consume unprocessed plant-based diets. The lowest rates globally are some parts of rural Asia, South America, and the people of the blue zones. And I'm guessing you might have heard of the blue zones, but if you haven't, these are places in the world where they have more centenarians than anywhere else, people that live to be at least 100. But what's really interesting about these long-lived people is that not only do they live a long time, but as they reach these advanced years, they are still active and productive in these regions. And there were actually 5 blue zones that were identified. One was Loma Linda, California. This is the Seventh-day Adventists in California, the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, Sardinia, Italy, Icaria, Greece, and Okinawa, Japan. And what this man in this picture just astonishes me, because he is an Okinawan centenarian. So he is at least 100 years old. Now, there are common practices or lifestyle practices that are common to every blue zone that we know of. And these people have strong sense of family. They tend not to smoke. They are socially engaged. They do constant, moderate physical activity. And where diet is concerned, there are 2 things. One is they all consume plant-based diets, and the other is legumes are dietary staples in every single one of these populations. And there is a lot of evidence for plant-based diets, and we're not going to take time to go through the bulk of the evidence, but I want to give you a little flavor for what we know. And some of the most impressive evidence, in my view, are the studies that have followed similar health conscious people eating different dietary patterns. So some of them are meat eaters or omnivores. Some are pescatarians or people that eat fish. Some are lacto-ovo vegetarians, meaning they don't eat any flesh foods, but they do include dairy and eggs. And some are vegan, or they eat 100% plant-based. And what's really interesting is when they compare the omnivores to the vegetarians to the vegans, they actually control for things like alcohol intake, physical activity, smoking. And what we know is for ischemic heart disease in EPIC Oxford, this is one of the big cohorts that we've been following for many years, since 1993. The ischemic heart disease was 22% lower among lacto-ovo vegetarians and vegans. And in the Adventist Health Study 2, hypertension was 75% lower among vegans and 55% lower among lacto-ovo vegetarians. Type 2 diabetes in the Adventist Health Study 2 was 62% lower among vegans and 38% lower among lacto-ovo vegetarians. In Epic Oxford, cancer was 19% lower among vegans and 11% lower among lacto-ovo vegetarians. Cataracts were 40% lower among vegans and 30% lower among lacto-ovo vegetarians. Diverticular disease was 72% lower among vegans and 27% lower among lacto-ovo vegetarians in the Epic Oxford study. Kidney disease in the Adventist Health Study 2 was 52% lower among vegans and lacto-ovo vegetarians combined. And I thought this was interesting too. The risk of getting severe COVID-19 was 73% lower among plant-based eaters. So why are plant-based diets so effective? Well, plant-based diets are so effective because they essentially put a lid on the drivers of chronic disease. Things like inflammation, lipotoxicity, which is when we store fat in places in the body where it shouldn't be stored, like in our vital organs, like our liver and our pancreas. Dysbiosis, which is unhealthy gut flora, oxidative stress, all of these things, when you eat a healthy plant-based diet, you literally put a lid on those drivers of disease. And of course, the most protective dietary patterns are those that minimize pathogenic dietary components and maximize protective dietary components. 7 steps to an optimal plant-based diet. So we'll go through one by one. Step 1 is to make whole plant foods the foundation of the diet. So not plant foods in bags and boxes, but plant foods as they're grown, essentially. And this is not a diet, as you probably are well aware, it is not a diet of deprivation. It is a diet of variety and color and flavor and texture. It really is a delicious way of eating. So what we want to aim for is about 9 or more, preferably 12 to 14, that's about what I get, servings of vegetables and fruits a day. And you want the variety and the color in this category. You want at least 2 servings of legumes a day. You want about 0 to 6 servings of whole grains a day, depending on your energy needs. If you're someone that needs a lot of calories, you're going towards the higher number. If you're trying to lose weight, you can eat no whole grains, or you can eat 1 or 2 servings a day, and that would be enough. You want to get at least 1 serving of nuts and seeds a day. These can be our primary source of omega-3s in a plant-based diet, so that's very important to ensure that. And then generous amounts of herbs and spices, which are fairly concentrated sources of antioxidants and phytochemicals. And of course, they also make food taste delicious. These are the foods, plant foods, are the only foods with fiber. And fiber is important. It's important for regularity and preventing constipation, but it's important for so much more. Fiber helps build and maintain a healthy gut microbiome because certain types of fiber provide food for our healthy gut bacteria. And if we don't have fiber, our gut bacteria don't have the food they need to thrive and survive. Fiber increases satiety, it reduces cravings, it reduces our risk of colorectal cancer, it can help to reduce blood cholesterol levels, it stabilizes blood sugar, it reduces our risk of GI disorders, it enhances immune function, and it lessens hormonal imbalances. So how much fiber do we actually need? Well, the RDA, or the recommended dietary allowances, are 38 grams a day for men and 25 for women. And to be precise, it's 14 grams per 1,000 calories. Step number 2, and this is a really important one, is be very picky about your sources of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, contrary to popular opinion, are not the enemy. Carbohydrates from whole foods are consistently protective to health. On the other hand, refined carbohydrates are bad news. So what are refined carbohydrates? Well, these are high carbohydrate foods that have been stripped of most of what is of value to human health before we eat them, because of food processing. And so we're talking here about refined sugars like table sugar and syrups and jams and jellies and candy, sweetened beverages, all of those things. And then we have refined starches like white flour products, white rice, and concentrated starches. Whole grains have been found to be healthy foods. There was a 2016 meta-analysis of 45 studies that reported reduced risk of mortality per 3 ounces of whole grain intake. And that's about 3 servings of grains, really. So a reduction in all-cause mortality of 17%, cardiovascular disease mortality of 22%, diabetes mortality 51%, total cancer 15%, and respiratory mortality 22%. So this is pretty impressive. But I think it's very important for all people who are trying to really fine-tune their diet to be as therapeutic as possible is to recognize that all whole grains are not created equal. A granola bar doesn't equal a bowl of oatmeal, and a box of flake cereal or like Kamut flakes, even if they're organic, doesn't equal a bowl of Kamut salad, for example. Step number 3 is to pick plant protein sources instead of meat. And the reason is really simple. When you go back to those components in food that are really protective, like fiber and phytochemicals and antioxidants and pre and probiotics, legumes, for example, are either high or very high in these compounds, whereas meat contains nothing or very little. When you look at the components that are most pathogenic or harmful to health, they're very low or zero in legumes, and they are either moderate or pretty high in meat. So what are the most healthful plant protein sources? They are unprocessed or minimally processed legumes like sprouted peas, lentils, and mung beans, cooked legumes, edamame, tofu, tempeh, soy milk, peanuts, peanut butter would be more healthful choices. Unprocessed or minimally processed seeds and nuts, intact whole grains like amaranth, quinoa, kamut berries, and fresh peas would all be good choices. Step 4 is to replace harmful fat with healthful fat. And essentially, you want to make whole plant foods your primary sources of fat. High-fat whole plant foods are rich in fiber and antioxidants and plant sterols and stanols and phytochemicals. Concentrated fats and oils, on the other hand, provide a lot of calories with very few nutrients. And for that reason alone, we want to minimize their intake. They have a very low nutrient density. We want to minimize saturated fat. The American Heart Association recommends under 5 to 6% of calories for heart disease risk reduction. And 5 to 6% of calories is about 13 grams in a 1,600 calorie diet. It's about 16 grams in a 2,000 calorie diet. If you look at the saturated fat in food, one of the things that you can't help but notice is animal products are very concentrated sources. Just 2 slices of Meat Lover's pizza, 22 grams of saturated fat. You're over the top. You haven't eaten anything else all day. You want to optimize your intake of omega-3s. So we're looking at 2 to 4 grams of alpha-linolenic acid per day. And you might want to consider direct sources of EPA and DHA as well. And so, how do you get 2 to 4 grams of alpha-linolenic acid? Well, an ounce of walnuts is 2.6. A tablespoon of chia seeds is 1.8. Of ground flax, 1.6. Of hemp seeds, a tablespoon is 1. Step 6 is to minimize dietary contaminants. And the worst offenders are environmental contaminants the byproducts of high temperature cooking and food additives. So environmental contaminants are things like pesticides in conventional produce, mercury in fish and seafood, arsenic in rice, chicken, fish, and seaweed. And POPs are persistent organic pollutants like PCBs and DDT and dioxins in fish and meat and dairy products. The solutions here are to choose organic when you can. And the Environmental Working Group has a nice little document that helps you to, if you can't afford to get everything organic, they put out a list of the dirty dozen. These are the foods most concentrated in pesticides, and the clean 15, the foods that have the lowest amounts. So our final step is to meet needs for all essential nutrients. Even if you do everything right, it's possible to fall short of essential nutrients. We want to get all the macronutrients we need, the carbohydrates, the protein, and the fat, especially essential fatty acids, and the micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals. To ensure adequate intakes, we need to be aware that plant-based eaters tend to have higher intakes of folate, vitamin C, K, E, iron, potassium, magnesium, and copper, although iron is less well absorbed, so it also deserves some attention. Nutrients that are most commonly falling short in plant-based diets are vitamin B12, calcium, vitamin D, iodine, zinc, choline, and omega-3 fatty acids. So we need to provide regular sources, either from food or supplements. We want most of it from foods, but if we can't get enough, especially if we're on a calorically restrictive diet, so we're limiting our calories, we may want to take a high quality, organic, vegan, multivitamin mineral supplement. So our take-home message is every time you eat or drink, you either feed disease or you fight disease. Well-designed whole food plant-based diets provide a powerful and effective means of fighting disease.